Hi, welcome back to Kids Club. This week, we are continuing our conversation about responsibility. So just to review, last week, we talked about what is responsibility? What does it mean to be responsible? And what are you as a kid responsible for versus what are you not responsible for? So remember, we talked about how adults and kids have different kinds of responsibilities. And what might be a responsibility for an adult is not necessarily something that you need to worry about. And also, we talked about how responsibility is more than just doing chores. It's about taking care of yourself too. Taking care of your feelings helps you be able to give back more. And this week, we are going to be sharing a couple stories. And in these stories, there's going to be a situation where it might be difficult to see at first who is responsible for what. But we'll talk about that and help figure out who's responsible for this and who is responsible for that. And what is the narrator or the character in the story responsible for themselves. So you can listen. I'll be reading them out loud, and they'll also be printed on the screen so you can follow along that way. Here is our first story, Michael. So, Michael gets a bad grade on his math test and is very upset because he studied a lot. At recess, Jim asks him to play. Michael is still in a bad mood because of his test and yells at Jim to go away and that he doesn't want to play with him. I think that a lot of us can relate to this story. You know, when we work really hard on something and have a disappointing result, that can make us feel bad. So I know I've definitely been where Michael has been in this story. But let's think about for a moment what happened in this story. So whose fault is it that Michael is mad? In the story, Michael is in a bad mood and he yells at Jim. But was it Jim's fault that Michael was feeling upset? No, Jim didn't have anything to do with Michael being upset and may not have even known that that's how Michael was feeling. So it's not Jim's fault. Instead of yelling at Jim and getting upset, what is something that Michael could have done instead? Yeah, like we said, maybe Jim didn't know that that's how Michael was feeling. So if Michael had told him, hey, I'm just feeling really frustrated and mad because I did bad on my math test and I need some space right now, then maybe Jim would have understood that Michael wasn't feeling good and given him the space that he needed. Or maybe Michael needed someone to talk to, so he could have told Jim, I'm really mad about that test. How did you feel about it? Maybe it was a hard test and Jim didn't do very well either. And then they could talk about how frustrated they both are. It could be as simple as Michael just saying, sorry, Jim, I'm in a bad mood right now, and walking away instead of yelling. You know, he wouldn't necessarily have to tell Jim why he was feeling upset if he didn't want to. But instead of yelling at Jim and taking his anger out on his friend, he could just say, I'm in a bad mood, and walk away. What is Michael responsible for in this story? Yeah, he's responsible for studying. That's true. We talked about that last week, that as a kid, part of your responsibilities are working on your schoolwork. What about his emotions? What was Michael responsible for as far as his emotions go in this story? Yeah, he's responsible for the way he acts. So remember, it's okay to feel angry. Everyone gets angry. It's an emotion that we have because it helps us work through whatever is going on. We wouldn't get angry if it didn't help us in some way. But what happened here was, instead of being responsible for that emotion himself, Michael took it out on someone else, and his actions made someone else feel bad. So in this story, Michael was responsible for how he dealt with his anger, and whether that meant talking about his feelings to his friend, or maybe he could have just run away and started running down the playground if that's something that would have helped him get his anger out. But it was okay that Michael was upset and angry, but he's responsible for how he acts that anger out. Okay. Let's look at this story. Anna's dad comes home and is mad because she left her bike in the driveway. He begins to yell at her mom and tell her that she should have told Anna to put her bike away when she was finished riding it. Anna's dad slams his hand on the table and tells her mom she is stupid. This one is a little different. It is talking about a family, and we have 3 people involved in this story instead of just 2. So let's think about Anna's dad in this story. Whose fault is it that Anna's dad is angry? Well, it's not her mom's fault. So he does blame her mom and say that it's her fault because she should have told Anna to put her bike away. But remember, we are responsible for our own emotions. So her dad is responsible for his own anger. What could her dad have done instead in this situation? So something made him mad. He, in this story, chose to yell and slam his hand on the table. What's something that he could have done instead? Yeah, just like Michael in the last story, he could have talked about his feelings as a way to start addressing that anger. He could have said, it makes me really upset when Anna's bike is in the driveway, because when I come home and try to pull the car into the driveway, I have to get out and move it. So maybe he had a long day at work and that's why it made him angry that he had to take that extra step. But talking about it and explaining how it made him feel, and maybe talking about a solution instead of going right into blaming someone. So instead of just saying, well, it's mom's fault, Dad could have come up with a solution with Mom and Anna. He could have suggested that Anna has a reminder on her bike somewhere, or maybe on the front door. So after she comes in from riding her bike, there's a reminder that lets her know she should put her bike away out of the driveway. So giving her some kind of help in remembering that that's what she should do after she's done riding her bike. So they could have come up with solutions, or he could have suggested a solution and tried to work out the problem with Anna and her mom instead of blaming. And what is Anna responsible for in this story? Is it her responsibility to calm the situation with her mom and dad? No. So remember last week, we talked about how there are some things that only adults are responsible for. And fixing problems between adults is their responsibility, not the responsibility of their kids. So, especially because Dad yells at Mom and calls Mom a mean name, this is an argument that the adults are responsible for in this situation. So Anna may feel upset or scared even that Dad is yelling and slamming his hands, but it's not her responsibility to try to calm him down or make the situation better. She is responsible for what she does with her bike. So whether that means trying to remember that she should put her bike away instead of in the driveway when she's done riding, or like we mentioned earlier, coming up with a solution that helps her remember she's supposed to do that. And she could even take responsibility by saying she's sorry and she didn't know that it would make Dad upset. And again, it's not her fault that he's angry, but part of her responsibility can be understanding that it is frustrating when she leaves her bike in the driveway, and that she can come up with solutions to make sure she puts her bike away. And remember, anger is okay. It's okay to be angry, but what you do with anger is your responsibility. And in this story, Anna's dad was not being responsible with his emotions. He not only yelled at her mom and blamed her right away, he also slammed on the table and called her mom a mean name. And those aren't appropriate ways for us to deal with our anger. He could talk about his feelings. He could suggest solutions to the problem. But yelling, blaming, and hitting things or other people is not a healthy way for us to express anger. Remember, if someone hurts you or is mean to you, it is not your fault. That person is responsible for their own actions, no matter what they're feeling. Being angry or upset or sad does not give anyone the excuse to hurt or be mean to another person. We all have the responsibility to address our own emotions in a way that is healthy and safe for other people. No one has the right to hurt or threaten you, even if they are upset. Each person is responsible for their own actions. So remember, you can feel any kind of emotion, that's okay. But your actions are what you're responsible for. And also, you are not responsible for protecting your parents or keeping your family together. So like with Anna's story, it was not her responsibility to try to solve the anger that her dad was showing toward her mom. That's an adult responsibility. It was her responsibility to take care of her bike and think about how she can do that better in the future. But it's not her responsibility to help her dad work through his anger or solve that tension between her parents. They're adults and they have the tools to do that themselves. But kids do have their own responsibilities. We don't get just to do whatever we want. Here is an example of a responsibility chart. So last week we talked a little bit about doing this, sitting down with your parent or trusted adult and figuring out what your responsibilities at home are. And remember, these can be chores and things like doing homework, but our responsibilities are also about taking care of ourselves and our feelings. So this is an example of a chart you can make that tells you what you're responsible for and when. So you are responsible for keeping yourself safe. Always, but especially in an emergency. Last week we talked about calling 911. So in an emergency, to keep yourself safe, that might be your responsibility, to know how to call 911. But talking about your feelings is also a big responsibility. And something you might think about is, when is that usually hardest for you? So maybe when you're upset or feeling overwhelmed, that's the hardest time for you to remember to talk about your feelings because you just get kind of stuck and don't know what to do. So you can remind yourself that when I'm upset, I'm supposed to talk about my feelings. Or when you're angry, or maybe when you're sad. So try and think about when is the hardest time for you to do that, so you can remind yourself. And of course, we have things like cleaning my room and doing my homework. And you'll notice there are blank spaces too, because I'm sure you have many more responsibilities other than that around the house. So you can think about what those are and when you're expected to do those things. And with this chart, you can hang it up somewhere in the house to remind you. So if you are always supposed to take out the trash in the morning, you can write that down on the chart. Remind yourself that you're supposed to do that in the morning, and hang that up somewhere where you will see it and be able to remind yourself. Maybe on the kitchen fridge or in the bathroom, next to the mirror, someplace where you're likely to see it and be reminded. And remember, if you have any questions about anything that we talk about in these videos, you can email them to our Kids Club online email right there. And remember, just to get the permission of your parent or trusted adult before you do this. Here are some follow-up things you can do as you think about what we've talked about in this video. So with your trusted adult, work on making a responsibility chart, like the one we just showed you. Label your responsibilities clearly so you can keep track of them. And also think about, is there a way you could make it fun? Can you set it up so you have spots to check off day by day when you do these things? Or you can add stickers when you accomplish something. You can get creative and really try to think of a way to make it interesting. Or maybe it's possible that you get a certain reward after you do one of these things. Or maybe if you are really good about talking about your feelings when you get upset, maybe you do that 5 times in a row and you get a special treat that you can talk about with your trusted adult, something that might be fun to look forward to and help motivate you to want to do these things. Next week, we're going to talk about safety. So how can you help yourself feel safe? And remember, if you have a question or want to share anything with the permission of the adult who helps you with these videos, you can email that to our email address. And these videos are all recorded and captioned and later posted to our YouTube channel, NB Kids Club. And there is the link right there. And some adults may also have had this emailed to them. And for any adults watching, this is just some information about New Beginnings. We have a 24-hour helpline, 206-522-9472. You can call that number anytime to talk with a trained advocate. And these are just some of the services the helpline can offer. Okay, well, thank you so much for being here this week. I am excited for you to work on your responsibility charts and find out a fun way to get yourself motivated for those things. And next week, we will be talking about safety. All right, I'll see you then.